It is episode 335 of This is Whole Life, and if you tuned in last week, you know that we have a special surprise today. This is something that I'm not sure I ever thought would happen, and it really took coming to the end of the road. Like, this is the last exit ramp before we get off the highway, and it was our very own Tami Cinquemani preaching for the unbelievably the very first time, like anywhere. Like, she's like, have you turned down speaking offers before for people that have asked you to do this?
I don't know if anybody was silly enough to invite me before this. No.
See, I can't imagine it. I think, and if you know Tami, you know that she doesn't like to toot her own horn. She doesn't like to be the center of attention. She likes to be in the back behind everything. But I just find it really difficult to believe that no one has been like, hey, Tami, I think we need you to come and speak.
Oh, I mean, Andy would push it occasionally, but,
Andy, I hope
always
you're listening.
backed out.
Good job, buddy.
No.
Actually, Andy was a little bit miffed after hearing her speak. He said, you worked for me all these years, and then here comes Ken, and he gets you to do it in the year and a half.
Good job, Ken.
Guess I'm just more manipulative.
And I like the fact that we can just use that word in open company and just and feel good about it.
I feel like we just have to own the truth.
Well, speaking of owning the truth and dangerous, it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And when it was like, oh, we're doing dangerous worship, and I'll have to admit that I was like, I've done some dangerous things in and out of worship. And I'm like, how dangerous can it really be? But this week, I really felt like this owned the title dangerous, because dangerous community was the topic. And I'll just read you the 2-sentence outline. Who should be allowed into the community of worship? What do we risk by holding a large, inclusive picture of God? And it's like, uh-oh. Already we're inviting people, or we're allowing people, and now we have an inclusive picture of God, or we just have a big picture, a large picture of God. And all of those things, when you start adding them up, and I don't think it matters which denomination you're in, those are all things like, we draw lines in the sand. Mm-hmm. This is you live across the holler, as it were. And these are fighting words. Like, this is what we hold near and dear when we think of church, which I think is often confused with worship, which is maybe why this is so dangerous. And Tami proposed 3 different types of dangers: and real danger, perceived danger, and
necessary danger.
Necessary danger. There it was. I gotta rattle my. This is such slippery paper. Tami was printing something on the copier, and it's like, this stuff is like glossy. I feel like it should be on the wall, and I can't really get my fingers around this. I loved the story that you talked about, the 10 lepers, mm-hmm. and the Samaritan, and being one of those lepers and being the only one that comes back. We know the story, but how many times have we heard that story and didn't really stop to take a deeper look like you did? And how many churches, like, have we all been to where the unity, like you talked about, is a result of the circumstances? Well, we're all Adventist, and there's not a church within 200 miles. So I guess if we're going to church with them folk.
Yeah.
And that's not maybe who we'd want to be there, or it wouldn't be the style of worship that we wanted, or maybe we don't like the pastor's delivery. I mean, there's a lot of things that people complain about church. So it becomes more of this is the only place we can go. But these also can be seen as safeguarding measures. Well, this is what it is. And if we keep these closely herded together, we can kind of keep everybody in line and make sure they're worshiping properly, because this is right, this is wrong, or this might be a little bit over the edge. This might be too dangerous. How have you seen your time, like here at Florida Hospital Church, at now WholeLife Church? That's a long time to be at one place, and to see how over the course of time, how have we led, or how are we leading as a church in that space that sometimes our worship is seen as dangerous mm-hmm. because of the welcoming spirit that we have here, and we're not trying to do the other.
Yeah, I think part of that is just the fact that we've always, I mean, the leadership at this church, Andy and thankfully, Ken is of the same. There is not just a desire and interest, but an excitement about trying new things, about pushing the boundaries, about, I guess when I think about God in general, and I think Jesus in particular, Jesus wasn't a safe person. I mean, he didn't last very long on this earth. And I think one of those reasons is because, he pushed at things that were supposed to be just common knowledge, and we're going to keep it this way. And I do think, going back to what you're talking about, the story of the 10 lepers, it's interesting because our chat online, people automatically start going to, oh, this is a great story about gratitude. Oh, this is like, and in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, it's not really where we're going. But the whole story, it's so easy to miss that aspect that Christ points out. There was a Samaritan. And like you said, the whole idea of this community of 10 lepers where they didn't consider themselves dangerous to each other anymore because they saw a common ailment, a common brokenness. And I think that's what we miss sometimes in the church. We like to point out different people that we might consider might not really fit into the community or not be good to welcome into the community. And I think it's because we don't understand that we're all lepers. We're all broken. We're all a part of this. And our only hope is that we realize that we are a community and accept that even when it's a dangerous community because we're different, and that requires a lack of comfort. Ken talked in his sermon last week about the fact that worship isn't about comfort, and we don't like that because we look to worship as this is the place I'm going to go and I'm going to relax and I'm going to feel comfortable. These are my people. This is who I am. I don't think that's what we're called to, and I think that's what this whole series is about.
But we just mentioned that they shared in their common misery, basically. And so it's like, okay, well, we have to be together. We don't really have a choice.
Right.
Why isn't the reciprocation of that true? Why, if you flip that and now they're all healed and they still don't, but now immediately they don't stick together. So is it only in the bad times? I mean, is that what we're like that is it only because we have no choice that we're together? Because as soon as it's like, okay, we're all healed, we can all go back to life. And now separation goes back into account.
Well, it's interesting. Tami Weiss came up to me after the service, and she had mentioned, because I had gotten a question about why did Jesus have to heal somebody before they were accepted back into worship? The whole point of the story was that I think Jesus was telling them, this person is acceptable regardless. And Tami brought up something that I thought was really brilliant. And she said, the whole concept back in that culture in that time was that people got leprosy because of a sin they committed.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Or a sin their parents committed, or, that sort of thing. And so it wasn't just the fact that they were separated out of worship because of their ailment. It was a character assassination. And so basically what you have in the story is Jesus, who is God, breaking that down even and saying, no, this was not because of a sin that this person committed. This is, you are accepted, you are loved, you are allowed to worship. And I think sometimes, you're asking, wouldn't these 10 guys, because they had been hanging out together, I doubt they would. I think because the culture, it's so easy to slip back into culture. And chances are if they were again accepted by the acceptable people who decide who is acceptable, they wouldn't want to step out of that again because the culture that's created. And I think so my biggest hope, and I think what we're trying to do here at WholeLife Church, is to say, let's be countercultural. Let's not say that anyone is excluded from worship.
Let's bring them along.
Let's bring them in, and let's not. Yeah.
Because we've all felt like the Samaritan at some point, whether it's just a church you don't know anybody at and you're like, well, I kind of feel like I'm alone here.
Sure.
Or it's because you feel like, maybe people do know my past. Maybe somehow that got out, or you're just not accepted for whatever reason. And there's, of course, seemingly the obvious external sins that people, if you stomp your cigarette out on the way into church, it's like, oh, whoa. I mean, now we have concerns because there's probably other issues at play. And none of the rest of us have issues, Randy. No, the rest of us came in pretty shining and squeaky this morning. I was pretty happy coming to church this past week, and it was actually a really bad morning for me personally. And I was just like, I didn't want to. It just started like, how it is where I don't want to get out of bed. That's the start. The second one was just like there were people driving slow on the way to church that were driving me crazy, and I was already a little bit late. And then when I got downstairs, they didn't have the table set up the way I wanted them. And, it's just all those little things that mean absolutely nothing. And then you go, wow, I just wonder why we slip back into these things. And you're like, oh, maybe I should look in the mirror this
Human
morning.
nature. It's human nature.
And see that. But I love the fact that that's not what we do here.
No. I hope not. I mean, I'm not saying we don't.
Well, I'm not saying it doesn't happen.
We're imperfect. The church is humanity, and humanity's imperfect. But I think our greater hopes are that.
I think the beauty of that story is how dangerous Jesus is to the in terms of exposing what was actually underlining the whole thing, and that's why I really liked what Tami brought out. There's this idea that I'm going to be complacent now. I'm literally complacent in my own leprosy, so to speak, because I found something that works for me. I found something that works from the standpoint of now I'm accepted by this group as opposed to the other group. And Jesus exposes a deeper issue in the overall community. And that's why I think he's dangerous. And I think that's what he calls us as a church, as his church, to be dangerous and in terms of exposing those things that we do get complacent about and not realizing how important it is to have Jesus as the real person. Because he exposed, and I think this story floated around early church Christendom, and then it got changed during the Middle Ages because it just looked like a story of gratitude. But I think this story was important to the early church from the standpoint of Jesus is the person that we worship, not the community, not the culture, not the priest and that's what he showed them, is that under all of this, and by the way, Jesus is dangerous, he's also safe. He's kind of both, it's kind of he's
dangerous to some and to some ideas. Yeah.
So here comes the Samaritan back to finally worship, which he hadn't been able to do most of it, all of his life. Yeah.
So when I think about that though, and if you've ever felt like the Samaritan, which I think we all have at some point, but that moment, it's to me when you laid it out in that way, it made me it gave me a different picture of Jesus, because we know everybody's precious to him. And, it's just like the story is, I think it's in Mark where where the disciples are pushing the children away and he's going, no. And here it's like the people that were the chosen people, and they were healed. And again, like you said, they were just doing what they were told to do. They were following instructions, but nobody else stopped to see what the beauty of it was, like the Samaritan did. And for me, it just gave me a really warm, fatherly, best friend kind of picture, where it's like, oh, he came back. And I from Jesus' point of view, that this person came back, and I think Jesus was I think his heart was touched. And it just the way you described it, I had this picture going in my head, both messages as you got there. And it made me go, that's what Jesus feels like when I say, today I'm giving my life to you again every morning. And that was a good feeling. And it was something that I took away as something I can do on a regular basis, just to have that feeling. And I just thought that was really unique to see it that way. Not that it's never been, but I've just never thought of it that way.
Well, and as important that is to you, think about, why would you not want everyone to have that same experience?
Right, yeah. Why wouldn't you want them to have that? And if that's something that you can, it's hard to convey though. I mean, it took me a long time to just say what I just tried to say, and it didn't come out all that well in the first place. But it's hard to tell somebody how Jesus makes you feel when you think about him in different ways, and you see these stories and you think, oh, it's just a Bible story. That's old. It's been told 1,000 times. There's no meaning left to that. And then all it takes is someone else coming at it from a view, even if it's just for a moment, that you hadn't thought of, or you hadn't thought of that day, that just gives you this really cool picture of Jesus. And it just makes you reevaluate. To me, it was just a cut point and a total reevaluation of my day. And I hope it just continues like that in the morning. I've been thinking about it every day since you brought it up. So thank you. That was
well, you're very kind.
that was it. Ken, why didn't we have Tami preach sooner?
You'd have to ask Andy that.
That's
Good response.
Good.
Way to go. Andy, I hope you're listening.
That's funny. That's funny.
No, he tried.
No,
He
it was great. I'm glad that we finally got her to do it, because it was something. If you haven't caught the message yet, please do go check it out, and you can swipe up in today's show notes, and you'll find that in our sister podcast, Speaking of Grace, the message is already there for you to listen to, and I hope you enjoyed as much and was blessed by it as much as I was. You kind of transfer to the granddaughters. Mm-hmm. And, and being, was it Nona?
Nona.
Right? Nona.
Yes, that's me. That's
awesome.
the Italian form of grandma. Yeah.
The Nona. I like that. But in how, and just the picture of how we've all, seen God as like, oh boy, I just messed up big time. Eden drops a candle and, a little worried about what Nona's going to think or what might happen. And like, I did a bad thing. And again, just from, we don't often hear from a female's perspective, and from the grandma, and from, the mom, the grandma, the Tami, who is just a woman with life experience, that it was a really cool look, again, at just how God thinks about us. And when you went on to talk about Adam and Eve, and like, who told you were naked in the garden? And I thought that might have been the coolest part of the message. Like, who told you? And instead of, who told you were naked?
Yeah. It's so funny how, depending on your picture of the character of God, is how you read most of Scripture, I think. But in that particular story, it did. I mean, when that whole experience happened to me with Eden, it absolutely broke my heart, because that child has never. I mean, she's been raised by two amazing parents, so she knows grace and love, and it is. I mean, she's grown up in a home that's been very secure. I'm very thankful for that. So there is nothing from her life experience that should have told her that there would have been fear. There's nothing. I mean, sadness maybe, because maybe this was something that Nona liked, but there was fear in her eyes. Wow. And it wasn't fear that she was going to be punished necessarily, but it's just a fear. To me, what I related it was a relational fear. Like, what did I do that's going to damage the connection that I have with Nona? And so, and she just, she just burst into tears, and it just broke my heart. So I immediately just scooped her up, because the only thing I wanted was for her to know that nothing mattered to me like she does. Yeah. And was I glad that the glass broke? Well, no, but honestly.
Yeah, it's just a glass.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it was a relationship thing. And so I think I had a friend of mine who after church was talking to me, and it's like, but I don't read anywhere that Satan, told them they were naked, or this sort of thing. And I said, well, but I think it's human nature.
Yeah.
When we do something, that's where we go. We go to fear. We go to, particularly if there's someone we care about and we're close to, how have I damaged that? What have I done?
What have I done?
And Eden knew. I mean, sure, she's 6 years old. She's been told, Eden, you don't play with everything. Eden, So she knew she was responsible for that. So it's not a matter of accountability. It's a matter of relationship. And this is, so I saw that very easily in the story, when God asks, who told you were naked? It's not, because again, God would have known who told the lie. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so since God knows everything, there wouldn't have been any doubt about that. But it was more of a, let me pull you back in. Let me draw you to myself again. Let me assure you that your nakedness is not the point here. It's okay to be naked with me.
Yeah.
You don't have to run and hide, because I understand the brokenness, and I wish you would have trusted me, but this relationship is still solid, so.
Man, that's a beautiful thought when you think about people that are still feeling, I mean, we probably all still feel naked in our spiritual journey. Maybe fairly regularly. I don't know. That depends on everyone's journey. But How do you convince somebody though that sees that or grew up kind of thinking that way, like, the who told you were naked versus who told you were naked?
It's interesting, Randy. I did not grow up in a home of faith. I didn't become a Christian until I was a young adult. And yet the little pieces from going to like vacation Bible school on occasion or Christmas or Easter occasion, the little pieces that I did hear about God, I was quite sure that this was a being who was waiting for me to do something wrong.
Yeah.
That's kind of the natural concept of God, which is wild because it's not the concept I have at all anymore of God, but yeah.
But I think we get that even friends that I have, that some I grew up with, some I've met later in life, that didn't, like you, they didn't grow up with a spiritual background of pretty much any formal kind. Mm-hmm. Like you said, maybe an occasional program here or there, or Christmas, or things you might watch on TV or movies or something like that. But where does that come for them? What the thought that came to me was, where do we get that from? From people that are looking at Christianity and they're going, all I see is the who told you were naked? That's what they hear. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I think they pretty much get it from us. Because what else is there? What's their compass? What is their, where are they getting their information from? And that is, to me, and just in my journey, that is the highest hurdle that we have to overcome, is how we look at God. And when we don't trust, and when we don't do, and when we don't look happy for long periods of time, and not to say that there's not things in life that can justifiably keep you there, but as Christians, eventually we have to rely on God and find some joy in the process and the gratitude. And I think to myself, and I think we do a pretty good job here at WholeLife Church, but how can we maybe, what would we improve on, or how would our messaging look, or maybe how we're living? I'm not sure the answer.
It'd be dangerous.
It would be dangerous. Nice. And I think that's why we don't do it. It's dangerous to put yourself out there. It's dangerous to be honest and transparent. And I think that's maybe the piece that we're maybe missing, but I don't know.
I think that one of the postures that we have, and I think that's the posture that we always see, is that God's holding back things from us. Mm-hmm. And for us to get those things, we have to please him. We have to do things that make him like us again. Mm. And so I think that mindset is kind of baked into a lot of things, how we're raised, get on dad's good side. It's baked into a lot of our relationships. And that's not the thing that Christ is trying. I think Christ is saying, look, please understand, I already love you more than you could ever possibly know. Mm. So if we're constantly thinking about that, then we're going to be probably doing the shame thing a lot.
Well, I think we can only understand as much grace as we're capable of giving.
Yeah.
And we're only capable of giving so much, so we can't possibly comprehend God's grace.
Yeah.
You're so quiet,
I know.
Ken.
I'm like,
I didn't preach this week, so I'm making sure that Tami has plenty of time to say whatever she wants to say.
It's sort of nice that way.
He's waiting for me to hang myself. That's what he's doing there.
You guys can't see it, but like after we were done, like the three of us all turned and looked at Ken, and he just gave us the eyebrows.
Yeah, it was well done.
Well done.
Don't need to add anything to something that's already good. I will say I really did appreciate that reminder about those 10 lepers, and I think the other part that really I think we probably all ought to spend some time thinking about is the three different kinds of danger that Tami talked about, because I think that really does play a lot into the way that we go about making assumptions about who's worthwhile to be at church services and who's not, and who can be involved in church services and who can't. There's the real danger that's out there, and then there's the go through them again, Tami, for us. Real, perceived, and then necessary. Yeah. And I think probably one of the trickiest things is to tell the difference between the three. And I think that a lot of times we often throw things into the real danger category that really belong in the perceived danger category, and that there are times that we aren't willing to actually move into the necessary danger area and engage something because it's necessary. So oftentimes we hear, well, what am I going to tell my children if they, if you have somebody that's, we'll just use the good old Adventist one that I heard. I had an aunt who was dating a guy that was smoking, wasn't a Seventh-day Adventist. And, the thing that you hear people say was, well, if that person's smoking around my kids, what do I tell them? Or, what if that person got up front and gave the scripture? What is that saying to my kids, that they're getting up front, giving the scripture, even though it's a known fact that they're smoking? And for me, that it's an interesting conversation to have, because I think there's valid parts of the conversation, there's invalid parts of the conversation. One of the things that we rarely question is, I'll just put it out there. I've been trying to lose weight because I've found myself getting to a point where I'm not happy with where I've gotten. I don't feel like it's terrible, but it's not the direction isn't the right direction. And so I've been trying to watch my calories, which is painful. I've never had to do that before in my life. I know it's a very blessed life to not have to do that up till this point. But I've been, trying to watch my calories and go work out. It's interesting to me how I don't think anybody would ever call Ken out for gluttony.
Yeah.
If my shirt doesn't fit quite right, and nobody was going to say much about that. Nobody's going to have a real issue with me being up front. And yet we go ahead and take certain subjects and we make them, you're okay to be up front. You're okay to be part of community with these known sins, but you're not okay with those known sins. And I think we have to be really careful, because I think that one of the things that hit me really hard, and I said it during the Q&A during first service about what Tami said, is the guests don't get to choose the guest list.
Yep.
And that one, I thought that was just spot on the money, because when you look at all these stories in the Bible, you look at the prodigal son coming home, the father doesn't do okay, are you ready to quit doing this? Have you quit doing that? Embraces him, puts the robe around him, puts the ring on his finger, which is basically giving him the unlimited family credit card. And that's before the kid is ever really, he kind of was like, I'm not worthy to be your son, but there's no proof that he's really changed. And as somebody who's lived through that kind of situation, I can tell you, relapses happen.
Yeah, they do.
And yet the father welcomes him home. And I think that one of the things, when people come to me and say, well, what do I tell my kids if they see this person doing this thing that I disagree with? For me, it's, hey, that's great. You have an opportunity to have a conversation with your kids about values that you have.
Yeah.
And by the way, your kids will have the same questions watching TV and watching movies. And for some reason, we think that well, that's the world. Well, you know what, kids, Anyway, I just think it's really important. I know one of the things that we always told my kids, because my kids grew up in we had some pretty strict ways of doing things. We grew up without our kids. I think until our kids were 13, they weren't watching much, if any, TV or movies. They weren't watching Disney movies. They weren't watching a lot of this stuff. And I'm not here to push the way that we did things. But what I am here to say is, we grew up with our kids being around a lot of people, including church leaders, sometimes my bosses, that did things differently than we did, and that saw the world differently than we did with what our kids. And so my kids would come home, oh, well, so-and-so gets to do this, and their dad's a pastor, and so-and-so does that, and their dad's works at the conference office. And we would say, you know what, guys, what they do is their business. Wetmores are different. We're different. We do things the way that we do them, and we're going to be different with the way that we do what we do. And we're not going to judge those people. We're not going to say that they're We don't want you going telling your friends that they're not right, that your mom and dad know that this isn't the right thing to do. We just want you to know that this is the way that we believe, and this is what we think is important. And it's never good to look at other people and base your decisions off of what other people are doing. You need to have your relationship with Jesus and decide what he's asking you to do. One of the things I think that one of the greatest things we can teach our kids and that we ourselves can do is, I think it's important for us to say, look, they're on their walk with Jesus, and I'm on mine, and I'm going to talk to my kids and train my kids to not be looking at other people to make their decisions, and instead saying, what is it that Jesus is telling you to do? And, so far to date, I don't want to jinx myself, I'm really happy with the way that my kids are looking at life. I'm really happy with the way that they're choosing to do things. And I've just found in my walk, the less we try to be controlling and forcing of other people, the better the outcome in the long run.
I think that's really good thoughts, Ken. And it is. There's no doubt. I don't think Adventism is alone in this. I think Christianity in general, a lot of times we like to look at behaviors. We like to decide, and as if because of the way you behave or don't behave is how God's going to value you. I think.
It's hard to put the sins on the rated meter if you don't do that.
I know,
Tami.
and I'll be very honest with you, and maybe I'm here. I'm getting ready to hang myself now, Ken. But
that's why it's quite up to this point.
I've got 2 months left, so it's gonna happen. But I think for me, and I'll be honest with you, the thing that was probably front and center in my mind in preparing for this sermon was not so much when we look at each other because of our behaviors. But when we decide that God values people based on who God created them to be, we've done this historically. It happened when the Christian church segregated slaves. It happens today when we disengage or disenfranchise women. LGBTQ plus community. I feel like the Christian church tends to, again, try to figure out the guest list. And I think if someone is genuinely seeking God, someone is genuinely wanting to be a part of a worship community, and we think that we can draw those lines and make those decisions for God to somehow protect God, I just think that's really, really unfortunate.
And that's a dangerous slope we've never seen end well. And it gets there pretty quick. And I'm glad you guys brought the conversation that way, because we're going to get to questions next. But I wanted to get to one of our whole life reflections this week, which said, what does the church risk by creating reasons to keep people out of fully engaging in a worship community? And that was, they were all good. And again, swipe up today, check out Speaking of Grace in the show notes there. You will find all of the reflections for this week. But it made me think of what are the risks that come from inclusion, because we're kind of talking about inclusion this week as part of our philosophy as worship as well. But like the philosophy of inclusion by being present. Yeah, you can be here. But also, please watch what you do, watch your behaviors, because we don't really want anyone to know about, what we all know. So please be on your best behavior. Please wear appropriate attire. Take your list and make it however you wish. And then the problem just ends up being, though, that right below that, you get it's really a total exclusion. Inclusion is not being present. It's actually being a part of the community and being a valued part.
Exactly.
And being a valued part means, like Ken said, it means this person does get to go up front, whether or not they smoked a cigarette on the way into the auditorium today, or whatever their sin might be that you see or you don't see. And, inclusion has to be part of that, as long as we're not, breaking laws, hurting somebody, something that a danger to the community.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we kind of sometimes think that by doing that, we think that we're somehow encouraging that person to change a behavior that we think is not correct. I think we're actually accomplishing the exact opposite. I think that if you really want people to grow in Jesus, they have to be included. They have to be in community. They have to be a part of things. They have to be invited. And when you leave people out, they're just like, okay, fine, I'll go somewhere else. I will leave. It's when you draw somebody into a friendship and a relationship with you that you actually gain the right to have conversations, to be in community with those people of all kinds. And the people, there are so many very, very lonely people in the world. I mean, I just, in the last week, I gave somebody a hug and they said, thank you. I don't get that very often. And I needed that. And it just hurt my heart that just people that you would just not even think.
Yeah.
And they just, but they're, and that's one of the things that to me is just always key. You look at these stories with Jesus and the lepers, and Jesus touched people that society said he should not be touching,
right?
That he shouldn't be reaching out to, and he gathered them in, and he ate at their table, and he, it's the equivalent today. Jesus eating at the table of these tax collectors is, it's the equivalent of putting people up front at church that sometimes that you would say, well, wait a minute, can we do that? And Jesus, the answer is yes, because Jesus did. Jesus did it. And that's exactly what the Pharisees were saying to him. Do you know what you're doing by eating with these people? You're saying that what they're doing is okay. No, that's not what I'm saying. It's what I'm saying is I'm in community with this person. I love this person. There's somebody that wants to be in community with me. And Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I'll draw everyone to me. I don't believe that we don't draw people to Jesus by hiding Jesus from them.
Yeah.
We draw people to Jesus by lifting Jesus up and putting them in contact. And so that's why it's so important for people to be involved, to not just simply walk in the door, sit down, and walk back out, but to be involved in a part of the community.
Mm-hmm. And it's a very intentional thing for a church to do. We've got the whole No Barriers group. When you talk about families that have challenges, physical challenges, that sort of thing, and it doesn't. Somebody's not going to feel included organically.
Yeah. No.
Sometimes, and it's worth the effort of a church to be inclusive because everybody is welcome. Yeah.
I think that's a great attitude. And just being a special needs dad, I know that, there's been times when Emily has been up front and, been included, and she's, she loves it, except she's terrified of it. And so it always, it's always a little bit of a roll of the dice, if you will, how it's going to go. But no matter how it goes afterwards, she'll talk about it for weeks because it's something that she got to participate in. People, saw her value in being a part of it, and it's a huge thing. And the idea of just being present is not, it doesn't have the same effect.
No.
And so being a welcoming church is great. Everyone's welcome, but at some point the rubber has to meet the road, and it's not just people with unique abilities. It's just sinners. Like, we all just have to realize that all of our brokenness, we have to come together and just put that aside.
Yeah, God only created beauty, and even if we might not see or understand the beauty, God only created beauty. And if we view every person walking into the church as a beautiful creation of God.
Yeah, no matter what. Okay, let's get to the questions because there's a couple. And I'm going to start with Jamila and Camilo because they stuck around for an extra couple minutes on the chat this week and got their questions in really late. And so we're going to start with them. Jamila asked, I still don't understand necessary danger. Would you readdress the description?
And that's not fair because I only have my sermon notes in front of me. See, I'm a writer. I'm not a speaker, so I don't think from the top of my head.
Necessary danger is, for me, the easy definition is if if your child is playing in traffic, as a parent, you would run out into the road, putting yourself in danger to get your child. It's a necessary thing that you do, because if you don't, something you love is going to be hurt. And so you take on danger because it's important. And I know in your sermon, Tami, you talked about civil rights. I think you mentioned that, a necessary danger was standing up for the rights of marginalized ethnicities and races and saying, hey, no, that's not okay. It's not okay. And so necessary danger is standing up for what's right, even though you may get hurt in the process because it's the right thing to do.
That's really good.
To do,
yes. And I think there are several aspects to that necessary danger. Another necessary, I think the way I ended the sermon was that what is in danger. And our hope is that what is in danger is the lie that the deceiver that Satan told. So we have to be necessarily dangerous to that lie, to put that lie to rest. I'm sorry.
I think another way of looking at it, I like, it's interesting how we each have so many different. My mom and my dad did a really interesting thing when we were growing up as kids in our family. We had a choice at one point. We already had a foster child in our home, but they were always babies, and we usually my mom took them in, and they were with us for about 4 to 5 weeks, more of a kind of a transition time. But we had a choice. The foster care, the supervisor came to us and said, hey, we've got a young boy. He's 6 years old, or I think he was 5 at the time, and we need a home for him. And it may be a lot longer than you've had. And it's been, actually we had him for about 3 years. We had a family discussion. I was about 8 years old at the time. And my dad said, we're thinking about bringing in a young boy. Now, you would think that having 3 sisters, I'd be excited about the idea of having, a brother and having this. I was one of the ones that said, I don't know about this, Dad. And I remember as a 8-9-year-old kid having an opinion for the first time. And I'm thinking, I don't think it would help our family. I think we have a close-knit family right now. We're already established, having somebody come in. And obviously you could tell there was a little bit of threat in here.
Sure, yeah.
To me. And I felt like, maybe this wasn't a good idea. And I was actually one of the ones that spoke out against it as a 9-year-old. And my dad said, that's probably the best reason for us to do this.
Oh, ouch. There you go.
Because he understood what was going on, and especially in me. Yeah. And it was the best decision that we could have made for me.
It's a great illustration.
That's a great illustration. All right. Camilla wants to know, how does acceptance and church discipline reconcile with each other? How would, as Christians, we would differentiate Christian culture and inherent and acquired church culture? How healing takes place without tension arising among members. I always go back to Andy Stanley. The tension is good as long as you manage it appropriately. But the tension is good. It means that there's things that we each hold differently, just like Jeff going, I don't think this is a good idea. And Dad's going, there's a little tension in the room, but I think this is why we need to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know, how do we balance that with acceptance and discipline? And where does the role of discipline fall in the church? If we're going to be dangerous and let people, come that maybe others wouldn't.
For me, I think it goes back to maybe raising my children. I mean, there's always going to be things that, there's going to be discipline. There's going to be consequences sometimes if, somebody harms something or I have to tell you, church discipline is a real difficult one for me because I'm not the person that's in the place of feeling like I need to discipline somebody else. I'm just not. So does that, does that fall? And maybe we all feel this way. I mean, I know I'd feel completely incapacitated as someone that's going to discipline, at least in the way I'm hearing discipline, is like, well, you didn't toe the line, and so but there are times when there are maybe situations of danger. Any story I've heard of church discipline it never set well with me. I'm sorry. Usually. Yeah.
So Ken, you've probably had to do this before as a senior pastor, right?
Yeah, unfortunately.
I'm sorry for that, because I can't imagine having to be that guy.
Well, unfortunately, within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, our church discipline system, which is based off of biblical, and I'm going to use the word, and I think it's important to understand it is based off of biblical principles. It is not necessarily, it's adapted to meet the culture that we've been living in. And the problem with the way that Seventh-day Adventist church discipline works is that it's a fine model for a church that has 100 or less members, but it's a very poor model for a large church like ours, because in the end, you're supposed to, you confront the person with one person, then it's two people, and then it's supposed to come to the church board. But before any church discipline can take place, it has to actually go before the entire church in a church business meeting. And I've really struggled with that because I've seen some things that need to be dealt with, but they don't need to be dealt with 1,200 people. And, it's not that kind of a conversation that needs to take place. And so I think that one of the first things to understand about church discipline is that the only correct form of church discipline is always redemptive. That's the first thing to understand about it. The purpose of church discipline is not to be punitive. In other words, it's not to punish. The purpose, and this is, by the way, this is straight out of the church manual. Go look it up. It actually says this in the Seventh-day Adventist Church Manual. The purpose of discipline is not to be punitive. It's to be redemptive. It's to tell somebody who's making some really bad choices that are hurting themselves and hurting other people, hey, cut it out before you really hurt yourself or hurt other people worse. And so all of us, when we have kids, we do discipline in some form or fashion. Some of us maybe do it better than others, but I'd wager that as much as Tami doesn't like discipline, I'd wager that she disciplined her children when they were smaller. And when you love somebody, you care about them enough to say, hey, that's destructive. And because that's destructive, we're going to have some boundaries that keep you from destroying yourself or destroying other people. And so,
does this process that you're talking about, does it start out like with what you're saying? If I was the person listening, I'd be like, not punitive. Right.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
And that's the hard part, because I'll tell you, people who are breaking boundaries rarely are sorry for it. And in fact, if you've ever tried to say, here's a boundary with somebody who doesn't want to deal with that boundary, they're going to tell you that you're mean, that you're unkind, that you're not loving, so on and so forth. When in fact, you are being kind and loving by having it, by saying, hey, no, this is the boundary and this is where we're going to be at. What I would say is that in my estimation, we have to be careful, because Jesus had a bunch of sinners that were following him that he was in relationship with when he was here on earth, and he still does today. And so we want to be careful that we don't become so obsessed with being the disciplinarian in the relationship that we take on the role of the Holy Spirit and God himself in the way that we go about trying to police God's church.
Yeah.
And so I have always felt, and there are people who feel the exact opposite of this, and we'll just have to agree to disagree. I have always felt that it was better to be more merciful and more grace-oriented than it is to be right and to enforce rules. I think people come first, and I think the Bible actually points that out. God bears a long time with a lot of people before he doles out discipline. In fact, it seems like God tries everything he can before he gets to that point. And I know you can read the Old Testament and sometimes see it differently, but the way I read the Old Testament, I see God trying everything he can to do that. And so when it comes to church discipline, when it comes to being inclusive, I think we have to really think, what is going to be the best way to help this person with something that I perceive to be a problem.
Yeah.
And am I the only one that's perceiving it, or is the church as a whole perceiving that? And that's really what the whole Matthew 18 thing comes down to, is the reason why he says get 2 or 3, because there's been more than one time where I've thought that somebody was really in the wrong, and I've gotten 2 or 3 other people to come with me, and at the end of the conversation, Ken, the issue's really on your side of things here.
Oops.
You've got some things you need to take care of. This is not them as much as it is you.
So if you're the starter and you're wrong, you also have to be very humble. And
you have to be willing to admit you could be wrong.
Yeah.
And so,
I
have never met anybody who is enthusiastic about receiving church discipline, but I've sure met a lot of people that are enthusiastic on doling it out on other people.
True. That's true.
And so my preferred way of going about it is the biblical way, which is to sit down and say, "Hey, Randy, I've noticed this in your life. I'm concerned. I'm concerned for you. I'm afraid of where this is going to lead. I'm afraid of where it is leading. I'm afraid of what's going on." And Randy says, go fly a kite, Ken. This is none of your business. At that point, if I feel like it is John, I think, uses it as a sin that leads to death. And he said there's sins that don't lead to death. I think that's important too. But in those circumstances, if I think that you are endangering other people at the church, or you're endangering yourself, that's when I'm going to go ahead and try to take it another step further. And I'm going to say, "Hey, Jeff, can you and Tami come with me to meet with Randy? And Randy, will you please meet with me?" And we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah.
But again, it always concerns me. Like, if we're going to talk about, whatever Ken's problem is, let's say Ken has a problem in his marriage that would lead you to honestly need to lead towards church discipline. Let's go ahead and say Ken's cheating on Rochelle. That's a big problem. That is hurting my kids. It's hurting my wife. It can, in my case, as the senior pastor of this church, it's going to create some massive problems inside this church, and it needs to be dealt with. It has to be.
Yeah.
The problem is that, are we going to do that in front of 1,200 people, bring out the details of my marriage and what's going on? I don't think that's healthy for anybody. And so that's where, ideally to me, this is where I think small groups are important. I think it should happen within the small group context that I would find myself in, where that small group would say, my boss, Orlando Lopez, would say, "Hey, Ken, we've tried to work with you. You keep just saying this is not a big deal. Pastoral ministry probably is not for you at the moment." And that's a painful thing, but it's not. I don't think Orlando at that point would be being punitive.
No.
He'd just be saying, "Hey, look, this is, and one of the cool things I've seen over the years, having worked in a conference office, having been pretty aware of what's going on in a variety of different conferences that I've worked in, I've known pastors that have dealt with everything from infidelity to pornography issues, and the conferences have worked with them because the person was like, "Yeah, I know I need to get my life together." And there's different ways that some conferences, depending on what the situation is, and every situation is different, they'll say, "Hey, you're on a plan to resolving this issue, and so we're going to work this plan, and you stay where you're at." Other situations have said, "Well, as a pastor, you're going to need to take a little sabbatical while we go ahead and let you
get everything
work on that a little bit." Or actually, it's not a sabbatical. Let's not get those. If I take a sabbatical, it's a leave of absence generally speaking.
Ken, I've got a few problems I've got right now. I'd like to take my sabbatical now.
But my point is, are we being redemptive in what we're doing?
That's the big word.
Or are we just trying to go ahead and make the point that I'm right, you're wrong, and until you can see life the way I do? And there's other things that we're just going to have a difference of opinion on some things.
Absolutely.
You think this is wrong? I don't see it as being wrong in my life.
Yeah.
And I think that's the whole piece of when it does get brought up, that the the motivation for it being brought up is redemptive,
Yeah.
and not to get them out of the church or get them out of, because that's where a lot of people want to see discipline go, is to get them separated from.
You need to throw that person
And
out.
I think that is. I mean, my kids would laugh if you suggested that or if I suggested I didn't believe in discipline, because yeah. But no, I think what you both have said, the redemptive aspect of maintaining the relationship, maintaining, the
Usually
integrity of the
justice means
relationship.
my justice.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
All right. Last question was from an anonymous person who said, or asked the question, how do we have God honoring conversations with those who told us all of those things that make us feel unworthy? Because that's a tough one when you're hearing, like, maybe you've heard God say, who told you were naked? And, people have told you those things. Well, I know what you do, or someone told me this, or they confront you and they've told you those things, and they haven't done it in that redemptive, or that I really care about you and what happens to you. I just would really like you to change what you do. And that's it. How do we respond in a God honoring way? And maybe, no one is better to answer that than the 3-4 of us.
Well,
we just got done reading crucial conversations.
I think Jeff would be a great one as a counselor to deal with this. The only thing I would say from the top is that sometimes there are people that it's healthier not to have a conversation with. And I'm just going to leave it there. And I'll let Jeff go.
But the question is a very important question.
Sure.
Because it's not like, because literally a lot of times people will walk back to their house or room or car or wherever they find solace and just break down. It'll be a really difficult thing to handle. They may have handled it with some poise while it was going on, but then it just stays with them for a long time. And I think there's a lot of different ways, but I think first of all is just addressing the fact that you can own it in the truth that's there. I think that's really important. In other words, if somebody is saying something to you, and by the way, their perception is their perception, and you can't change that right away. So usually as a strategic way, I usually tell people to just, I'm sure in your perception, that's a pretty difficult thing to deal with. And tell me more. So, you kind of want to get a little bit more of what's behind that, so you could get on top of it that way.
Yeah.
But there was somebody that was just this happened a couple of weeks ago, and they said, I do wrestle a lot with a lot of things, as I'm sure you do too. And I haven't been told that by God yet. What has God told you about this?
Sure.
And it sounds a little snarky, but I do think that a lot of times people believe that they're coming with, some authority or some kind of peace. And it might be good just to sit back and say, I do wrestle with a lot of things. Help me understand a little bit more of what you're talking about, because I do want to get to that. But it's hard, because when anybody comes to you with something that they think you're doing wrong,
it's a tough.
Oh man, it's hard not to be defensive.
It's hard not to be on that receiving end and not just putting out.
And most of us, including myself, don't do very well.
Yeah,
there's a little bit of a piece that gets built up, but see if you can find some clarity in it. See if you can find some understanding where you could, get a little bit more behind it.
And I like what you said, though, Jeff. You own what you can own.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, you don't have to necessarily discount everything someone says. Own what you can own, but you don't have to own all of it.
You don't.
You don't have to own all of it.
You
Sometimes
just find the truth.
Sometimes it's good to have the conversation. Sometimes it's good to not have the conversation. Sometimes it's just good to walk away from the conversation and then come back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. You can't, and it's always good to remember just that, you have no idea what this person has gone through or what may have caused it. So at least and this is super hard. I'm not good at it, but
Jesus was really good at it.
Just
right?
try to give you the first benefit of the doubt, at least.
A lot of times he was in the middle of it. He was never, he was at the middle, but he was always really good at it when they came to him. But even with the woman caught in adultery, and by the way, the woman and everybody else that was caught in adultery. He said, you guys are right. Man alive. Yeah. So go ahead, pick up your stone. Whoever wants to, who's ever the sinner without sin can, without sin.
I don't think we can get away with that, though. I think that's just a Jesus thing. I don't see the rest of us getting it.
No.
So thank you guys for all the questions and the engagement. And of course, if, you don't have to watch online to ask a question, you don't have to, be in attendance. You can ask your questions anytime, 407-965-1607 or podcast at WholeLife.Church. And we'd be happy to cover them each week. Towards the end of Tami's message, she said, "Who told you that you were naked? And who told you that you were not enough? Who told you that you were too much? Who told you that who God created you to be is shameful? Who told you that your core belief is hostile to God's love, mercy, and acceptance? Who told you that you are not worthy of God's love?" And she finished with, "At this church, we believe Jesus has put those lies to rest. We all are invited to and accepted in worship. And that makes this a dangerous community, necessarily dangerous to the lies of the deceiver." And if that's something that we can remember and put in our lives each week as we come to church, knowing that everyone else is on a journey, similar, different, doesn't matter, but everyone broken pieces, walking in, looking for a little restoration and looking for and not looking for anything punitive. Yeah, we're looking for that redemptive. So if we can all keep that in mind, that's great. So Tami, I thoroughly enjoyed the message. My daughter Ellie was just thrilled beyond belief, telling everyone, "Did you catch the message? Did you catch them? You got to catch the message." Mom, sweet. You missed the message. You got to catch the message. You have to listen to the podcast. So thank you for your message. And we're just sorry that this is probably the only one. I'm just bummed. That's all. I'll just go there.
I don't feel that in my soul. I don't feel like this will be the only one.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah, let's
I will
Tammy's
continue
mom.
to write. I will continue to write. Yes, I will continue to write.
So next week, this is kind of a back-to-back anomaly. We are going to have another person that I'm sure he's preached here before, because I remember at least once since in my time. But Richard Hickam will be our guest speaker this week, and he will be continuing part 3, right? This will be part 3 of Dangerous Worship, Dangerous Expressions. How many of our senses are we allowed to use in worship? Talk about raising those hands. What do we risk when we push the comfort zones and allow worship to happen in creative new ways? So, just about as divisive as who we are and what baggage we bring is when we get here. What do we do when we worship? That's just about as controversial. What kind of music do we play? You got lights that move? That's probably not holy. There's lots of things to think about as you do that. So I would encourage you to not miss that either. But I think that's everything. Tami, anything else?
That sounds good. I think it's a wrap. Thank you.
She says that sounds good because it's not me next week. That's why it sounds good. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us as always, and have a great week.